Okay, thank you guys for joining today. We're going to go through a webinar for pattern alignment. Particularly, we're going to go over two different methods. There's a manual method and an automated method as well. As we go through this, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat function for GoToWebinar, and I'll be monitoring those as we go through the presentation. And if I don't answer them right away, we'll get to them towards the end of the webinar. So to start out, all of our patterns are done through the Automate tab, whether it be creating the pattern or doing the alignment. So I'm going to switch over to the Automate tab. And for this first example, I have one of our precision lateral calibration standards, which has a grid array on it. And particularly, I'm using the 500 micron pitch one, which is a 15 by 15 site grid. So that's what this pattern is that I have set up here. And in this case, since I have everything very well aligned to the XY stage, if I click on any of these, we see that it moves accordingly. But as we go through, and if we were to pretend this was a kind of production part where we may be measuring sample after sample, and the skew or rotation of the sample might vary between each set, and we want to account for that, we can do it pretty easy, either manually or automated. For this example, though, we're just going to do the manual method, and we'll show the more automated method for a more complex sample. So to do the manual alignment, first right-click on whatever sites you want to use as the alignment sites. You can choose any that you want. In this case, I'm just going to use two along the very top row that are the furthest apart, so site 1 and site 15. For that, just right-click on the site and go to Toggle Site Alignment and then Pattern Align. And that will outline that box in yellow, telling you that it's an alignment site. Similarly, we're going to do that for site 15. And now that those two sites are defined as the alignment sites, if we were to click on Align Pattern, it's going to drive to those two sites and it will allow us to align. Now, depending on how much skew the sample has, if we're taking these measurements at fairly high magnification, which in this case we're using the 20x objective, even a few degrees of rotation might make it really hard to figure out where the fiducial marks are. So rather than using the high magnification for alignment, we can have it automatically switch to a lower magnification, such as the 2.75x, to make it a little bit easier to do the alignment. To do that, we switch to the Advanced tab, and we're going to add a new control. If we right-click and go to Select Items, I'm going to search for Align Objective and add that control by enabling the checkbox and clicking OK. So here's where we can select from a drop-down menu which objective we want to use for alignment. So in this case, I'm going to say, let's use the 2.75x. Now I'm going to rotate the sample a little bit so it's no longer aligned, and we can see as we go to all these sites, it's no longer aligned to where it should be. When I click Align Pattern, it's going to automatically switch over to the 2.75x objective, so we can see things a little bit more easily. And now we can drive to where the first one should be. So we'll say right about here and click OK. Next, it's going to move to where the last position should be, which is box number 15. Oh, I just saw a question. It looks like the screen got frozen. So actually, I'm going to back up then, and we'll redo this one. So I'm just going to quickly reset it back to where it was. So as we initially got this set up, so we've got the precision lateral calibration standard on there, which has an array of different grids on there of different pitch values. In this case, I'm going to use the one that's the 500 micron pitch, and it's a array of 15 by 15 boxes with the 500 micron spacing. So I already have a pattern set up for that. And if we go to these different sites, it'll be set up for a nominally aligned pattern. But now that we want to make this into an align, or allow it to align to these sites, if we right click on a given site, such as 1 and 15, and go to toggle site alignment and then enable pattern align, in this case it was still aligned from earlier. And then similarly, we would right click on site 15, go to toggle site alignment and select pattern align as well. With those now labeled as alignment sites, the outlines of those boxes are yellow, telling us that they are alignment sites. So since these boxes fill up a fairly small portion of the, or fill up a fairly large portion of the field of view, if the sample is rotated or skewed a little bit, then it might be too far out of the field of view and hard to find for the purpose of alignment. So we can have it run through and align relative to a different objective at, say, a lower magnification to make it a little bit easier to find the fiducials as we go through. So to do that, when we're in the pattern controls window, we can switch to advanced, and we're going to add a new control by right-clicking and go to select items. And then in there, I'm going to search for align objective, enable the checkbox to add that. So from this drop-down menu, we can select a lower magnifications or any magnification that we want. In this case, we'll say, okay, for the purposes of just doing the alignment, let's use the 2.75x objective. And I'm going to now physically skew the part on the stage so it's no longer very well aligned. And when we click Align Pattern, we'll see that it will automatically switch to the 2.75x objective. And we can see that now the pattern's skewed off. So what we want for position 1 is actually now not centered. So I'm going to use the joystick and just move that so it's right behind the center of the crosshair. And click OK, so it says that's position 1. Now it's going to move to where it thinks position 15 should be, but in reality, position 15 is the box up here. So I'm going to use the joystick to bring that back down into the center. And click OK. So now it's rotated the pattern, and we can see exactly how much it rotated by, in this case about 5.6 degrees. And if we were to click on any of these sites, we can see that the box is directly in the center of the field of view, which is exactly what you want. So if we were to go through and run this pattern, we'd know that we would be able to capture all the sites that we want to accurately. So this is a fairly straightforward case where you have a nice rectangular array of features. So you have a nice rectangular pattern, but we can also do this for much more complex patterns as well. So for the next example, I'm going to put on a different sample that I have, which is a printed circuit board. And I already have a pattern set up for this. We won't go through the actual creation of the pattern, but it's fairly straightforward to create a free pattern where you just go and train it by driving to the different areas of location on your sample. So for instance, we'll use this free pattern where these are the different locations of where we want to go on the sample. And for this one, I'm actually going to use the 10x objective. So you can see, okay, these are all the different points across the sample that I want to measure. And if the sample is even skewed just a degree or so, it's going to be hard to make sure that we reliably hit each of those points. So what I then did is I created a pattern that's going to be for a series of fiducials. So on this printed circuit board, there's 3 fiducials. In the top left corner, there's a small little circle. And in the lower left-hand corner, there's a bigger circle. And then in the lower right corner, there's a triangle. So for this major pattern that I created, position 1 is the same as position 1 in the kind of pattern of the sites of interest. and then sites 2, 3, and 4 are going to be the alignment sites. So first I'm going to right click on site 1 and say insert pattern. Then I'm going to choose that pattern that has all the sites of interest. There we go. So now we have the 3 alignment sites, and then we have all the local sites of interest that we want to measure. So now we know for sites 2, 3, and 4, they're going to be the alignment sites, but we don't care about actually measuring them. So we can actually toggle them to be inactive in regards to being measure sites. So if you right click on a site, you can go to site toggle site include exclude, and now we'll see site 2 is white instead of blue, which says it's an inactive site. And since we're also going to want it to be an alignment site, at the same time, I'm going to right click on it, toggle site alignment, and choose pattern align. Now I'm going to do the same for sites 3 and 4. A shortcut to toggle sites inactive or active is to hold down the shift key and then just left click on them. So I'm going to right click on each of those again, go to pattern align. And now we have it set up so that it's automatically going to go to the sites of interest. Now, for the automated alignment for this, we need to train it somehow. And for that, for the training and for the actual alignment purposes, we're going to use a third-party plugin from Cognex, and it's a plugin called VisionPro, which is a 2D vision analysis. So it will be able to look at the various fiducials, recognize those, and reposition them within the field of view as we want. So to do the initial training, we need to take some measurements of those fiducials because it's going to take measurements for the alignment as well. So for those, I'm going to go to the 2.75x objective. And then first move off to the top left where the first fiducial is. So here we have the first fiducial, which is this circle up here. I'm just going to start out with it somewhat well-centered to keep things consistent as possible. I'm going to take a measurement here. Okay, so now that we have the measurement, we'll go over here to train feature. And in here, we need to first add the feature that we want, or give it a name, because we can use different alignment features at each of the sites. So I'm going to say click add, and I'm going to call this the small circle. Click OK. So for the alignment, you have the option of using either the surface or the intensity data. Whichever one has the best contrast and clearest definition of the fiducials is the one that you should use. So you can switch between them and see, okay, which one's the clearest, cleanest, and in this case, it's probably going to be the surface, since we have a nice kind of clear circle here and empty space around it. So as we go through and we do this, there's some empty space on the outside, and it happened to get a few stray data points, and maybe there's some missing data, so we want to fill that in. So we can actually pre-process the data with some surface processing, just like you would normally do to a measurement, under this pre-processing window. So to clean up those little bits of stray data, I'm going to right click and add an area step. I'm going to say select by size and just choose the biggest cluster of data, because I know that's going to be the main core portion of the data, and all the stray data points are going to be smaller than that. So next I'm also going to add in a data fill step to fill in any of the little bits of missing data, and we'll just set that up nice and high, maybe around 5,000. So now as we look at that, we've got everything pretty nice, clean looking data. So we'll close out of the pre-processing. And what we need to do now is start the actual training process. So to start out, we'll click the grab train image, and it will take this input image and it will import it into this current train image option. The turquoise rectangle is going to be our train region. So we use that to define what should be the fiducial. And it defaults to being a rectangle, but since we have a circular fiducial, to make it a little bit easier to get things set up, I'm going to actually switch under the train region and origin tab from a rectangle to a circle. The shape doesn't matter too much, except whatever's easiest to define the feature. So I'm first going to set this so it's about as equal in size to the fiducial as possible. And then the turquoise marker with the little arrows on it is what should be the center of that, or what should be the origin. So if I click center origin, it's going to put it right in the middle of that circle. And now for the purposes of training, we want this to not be the exact same size as the fiducial, but we want it to be a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to open it up. So then it has some of the empty space around it to make it easier for the training to work. So once we have that set up, we can go back to train parameters and click train. So now we can see this is what it's going to use to find the fiducial each time. Now that we're done with defining the small circle, I'm going to go over now to where site number 3 should be, which is the larger circle. And similarly, we'll take a measurement here. And now we'll go through and train that feature. So since this is a different one, we're going to click add and we'll call this the big circle. Similarly, we'll use the surface data. If we want to add in some pre-processing, we can certainly do that as well. We can use either the same processing or different. It's up to you. Now, as VisionPro is looking for features, it's looking for areas of contrast. So the more contrast that we can give our image, the better that Cognex will work, or better that VisionPro will work. So another way that we can increase contrast is under the image source tab and then settings. This is where it's setting effectively the scaling, the gray scaling. So if we go to percent, we can say rather than going from 0 to 100, even if we set it from 95 to 5, if we click the play button, now we see under the last run output image, it's got a little bit more contrast to it. So the center is a bit darker and the outside is a little bit brighter. So it makes it easier for VisionPro to find those features. So now back in the Cognex Align editor, we'll click grab train image and switch from the current input to current train. And just like we did for the small circle, I'm going to switch over here to the circle. Move these over here and get them lined up. It's good, and we'll click center origin to make sure that the origin marker is in the middle of that fiducial. And then open this up to make it a bit bigger. Go back to train parameters and click train. So that has the first 2 fiducials made. And now we can go back over to site number 4, which is the rectangle. Get that somewhat lined up. Take a measurement. Okay, so now we can click on train feature and we'll do add. We'll call this one triangle. We'll use surface and we'll also put in that same pre-processing. Worked out pretty good before. And let's add a little bit more contrast to this. And we see that much kind of clearer image for VisionPro to work with. Go back to grab train image, and we can switch from current input to current train. So now we could continue using this rectangular feature, or since this is more of a triangle, we can say, okay, let's use a polygon instead. And in this case, we just want 3 points, so I'm just gonna get rid of one of these coordinates, or one of the corners. So now we end up with a triangular shape. We can go through, position that, and then drag each corner to where we want it to be to define our area of interest. And in this case, we don't necessarily want it right dead center because I want it to actually be kind of along the hypotenuse of the triangle based off of how I trained it or how I set up the pattern. I'm gonna go through and set it right about there. So now for the circles, regardless of rotation, it doesn't matter because it's a circle, it's symmetric all around. But in this case, the triangle, since if it is rotated, it's going to be very clear to the software, and we want to be able to account for that rotation. So if we go to run params tab, we can tell it, okay, rather than say, okay, it has to be right dead 0 degrees, say, okay, well, it might be plus or minus 45 degrees from where it is right now. And you could restrict this further down if you knew that you were definitely always going to be within, say, plus or minus 10 degrees, but it doesn't necessarily hurt to leave it a bit bigger at negative 45 to 45. The defaults there I have found work pretty well most of the time. Now we'll get back to train parameters and click train. So now we can see that's the trained image that we're going to use. So now that we have the 3 fiducials trained, we need to now tell the pattern where those are supposed to be used. So exiting out of the train feature window, and we'll right click on one of the fiducial sites. So say for instance, site 2, go down to set auto alignment feature and pattern align. And from the feature, we can see these are the 3 fiducials that we made. We know the one in the top left should be the small circle. So we'll select that. And if your fiducials were the same at all of your sites, you could leave this use current settings for all sites, and that's all alignment sites. But in this case, we have 3 different fiducials, so I'm going to uncheck that because we want to set it for each site. Next, we'll go to site 3, set the auto alignment. And in this case, we want to use the big circle. And now for site 4, similarly, set auto alignment feature, and this one's going to be the triangle. So now as we go through and do this, since we're actually going to be taking measurements and not just going visually off of what we're seeing in the field of view, and an operator is going to be adjusting it with the joystick, we may need to optimize the measurement controls as we switch to the other objective to get better data. So what we can do is rather than just setting an alignment objective, we can tell it to import a settings file, particularly to be used just for the alignment. So similarly to how we added the align objective control, I'm going to add 2 other controls. There's align settings file and align settings mode. So for the align settings mode, you can either point to a actual settings file, a .setx file, or you can embed the file into the application. For most production environments, embedding the file makes it easier so that you don't have to keep track of multiple files. So I'm going to choose that for this example. Then when we select settings file, click the 3 little arrows, and this is where you're telling it really whether you're either using a settings file or embedding the settings. In this case, we can just say, okay, well, we know all the controls that we just used are good for the alignment. So we'll say import current MX. So now it grabs all those settings that we were using and brings them in. So we can click close. And we're going to switch back over just for example, say the 10x objective. Say, okay, This is pretty close to where I know that this site should actually be. So we'll leave that there. Now when we click Align Pattern, it's going to switch over to the 2.75, drive up to this top left corner, and we can see, okay, it's pretty close to being aligned, but it is a little misaligned. It's going to find that small circle and then move it into the center of the field of view. Now as we get to site 3, it's a little closer, but it still is off in a little bit of rotation. So this is going to fine tune the alignment even more. And then as it goes to site number 4, we should be pretty close to dead on, which looks like we are pretty close, maybe just a little bit more fine tuning. So now it's going to switch back over to the 10x, and now everything should be perfectly aligned. So regardless of which site I click on, we should see the features right in the middle of the field of view. And it looks good. So in this case, we had just a little bit of skew, but now I'm going to actually take and I'm going to add a little bit more rotation to it. And click Align Pattern. Drive over to site 2. Even though it was that far out and it just barely captured it, still was able to find enough of the feature to move it into place. And in this case, it was a little bit too far out of alignment. So what it's actually going to now do is it's going to spiral around where it thought the feature should have been, so that it gives it kind of more opportunity to try to find the feature. So even if it is outside of the range of the initial larger field of view of the 2.75x objective, it still is going to be a little bit more robust in going around to try to find the feature. So now it found it in that last measurement. We can see, okay, at this final site, we are pretty close to where we want to be. It's just going to do that fine little last fine tuning to get this aligned. Switch back over to the 10x. So now if we click on a site, we see similarly, we are still right on to where the features all should be. And this was, if we go back to pattern, with over a degree of rotation that it was still able to handle without problems. So there's two different methods depending on how much operator input that you want when it comes to alignment. You can either do the manual option where it will drive to where it thinks the site should be and the operator will need to use the joystick to find the alignment features. Or if you want to do a more automated method, you can go through and use the Cognex VisionPro plugin for MX to go through and first train where those fiducials should be and what they look like, and then use VisionPro to automatically find those and align the pattern for you. And even though I was going through and clicking the align pattern button manually to trigger either of the alignments, you could have it set up so that regardless of when you go to initiate the pattern, that it first starts out going through the alignment process. So if this wasn't a production environment, you don't need to instruct it to do the alignment. It would automatically go through and start the process whether it's starting the manual process or the more automated method as well. So that wraps up what we have for the little training session today on pattern alignment. If there are any questions, I'll wait a minute or so for you guys to submit those. If not, thank you for joining us today. Hope you guys are well, and we look forward to having you guys again at one of our training sessions.